guys so much. What a welcome. This is a great crowd. I can feel it. So I'm going to get a little political, but I think you can handle it. We'll see how we do. Okay, this is what I normally do. My academic work, and every professor has a niche, a place where they're supposed to stay and be very serious and profound and only ask very conservative questions. And I've traveled around the world looking at coffins from a particular time period, documenting them, photographing them, working with very detailed data sets, being really thorough in my work, crossing every T, dotting every I. So this book is very different. It's like a sea change for me. It's a pause. It's a way for me to remember why I got into this field in the first place. Because most archaeologists go into studying ancient people because they're obsessed with what it was like thousands of years ago, and they want to go in some kind of time machine. They want to figure out what it was like for those ancient people. And we get into it, usually, for very romantic, emotional reasons. And I'm no different. And ancient Egypt is something that, for reasons that I cannot explain, and I do not understand myself, just runs in my blood, and I need to try to crack this and figure it out. But as you go through grad school and you get your PhD, you become rigorous and you're trained and you're only asking certain questions and don't leave your niche. And so I lost some of the feeling. I lost some of the interest in trying to make these people live and breathe again. And so that's what this book is for me. It's a way of trying to go back in time and inhabit the mind of this one woman whose name everybody has forgotten, and try to figure out what made her tick, how she did what she did, because what she did is extraordinary, and to try to really just get inside her bones and figure out how she was able to surmount the obstacles that she could. So it's a very, very different kind of work, and I will catch flack for it amongst my colleagues, my Egyptological colleagues, we'll see. Now, I said so, right? Okay, now, when I show this image, I always get I feel it amongst the audience today. I feel there's like a frisson, there's like a, I don't know, some sort of anxiety or emotion or something when you see all these powerful women talking to you like this. How does it make you feel? Why do we have ambivalent feelings towards this and not, come on, next slide, towards this? I'm not saying Putin's the guy you want to hang out with, but if you're Russian, you might think Putin is just the bomb. He's your guy, right? You feel safe, and he's going to push your nationality forward, and he's going to put Russia on the map, and you feel great about this, and whether or not you like Obama or not, I mean, you might attack him for his race, but are you going to attack him for his gender? Probably not. And we feel differently about this than we do about this. And I teach a class at UCLA called Women and Power. And I start out with this slide. And I stay with this slide. I say, how does it make you feel? What do you think? What are your emotions? And most of the students, as you can imagine, taking Women in Power are women. And I've got 20% guys who just look like deer in headlights and terrified they don't want to say a thing, right? Because it'll be wrong. So the women usually end up talking first and the guys will warm up. But they usually end up saying, and these are the women saying this, that they feel like their mother is mad at them. That they feel somehow like they're in trouble. They feel like there's something wrong with this. They're not sure if these women should be in charge of all this, and I don't know. So as a feminist, and remember, being a feminist only means that you think women should have equal rights and powers as men, that's all. How scary involved here. But being a feminist, to me, means I would like to ask the hard questions. Why do women not have power in this world or in the ancient world? Because I'm an Egyptologist, of course I'm going to go back to the ancient world to try to figure this out. But let me just quickly set the stage and give you some facts to lay out very precisely. The women don't have power today, and why is that? So first, what do I mean by power? I split power up into a number of different types. When I'm teaching this, we say IEMP, ideological, economic, military, and political. That's how I like to split it up. And I do focus the class very much on political power, but let's go through some of these and see how we're doing today. So female world leaders, what do you guys think? How are women doing as leaders of states? I mean, come on, we have to call a spade, right? This country's never yet elected a female leader, no matter what you think of Hillary Clinton. I mean, it hasn't happened. And if Hillary Clinton is elected, I guarantee you that those 8 years will be a discussion of misogyny. just like the last 6 years have been a discussion of racism. So we can think about that. Women in Congress, underrepresented, even though we're 50% of the population. And this is the same in Europe, in parliaments in Britain and in France as well, and in the EU as a whole. And then when you talk about money, it gets so much worse, and I find this so interesting. When we're talking about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, the slide I have here has 3.2%. It's gotten a little bit better. We're at 4%, people. 4% in this country for CEOs. So when we're talking about handling money and putting a woman into power handling money, people just freak out. They don't feel that this is appropriate. And let me tell you how I feel like about this on a very personal level. Do you remember when Melissa Meyer was having her baby, CEO of Yahoo, and everyone freaked out, how can she be CEO of Yahoo and then have a baby and nursing and breastfeeding? This is impossible, how is this gonna work? And you had feminists on TV saying, this is not a problem, of course she can do it. And there I was with a tiny baby, breastfeeding, going, looking at the TV going, she can't do it. How could she do it? I can't do anything right now. This is a disaster. Because when you're, things kind of go south and it's really hard to deal with that situation. So, again, I like to call a spade, and when you're pregnant, breastfeeding, raising children, dealing with all of those things that women naturally do, this doesn't predispose you to power. But then I think further and I think, okay, but Hillary's not breastfeeding children. She's past all of that. She's not somebody sexual we need to be afraid of who's going to seduce us into doing what we think, right? Right? So if that's the case, why are we still so hostile to women in power? Why is and we call it the crone in anthropological circles, that woman who's moved past reproductive age. I'm approaching my cronehood, right? It's true. Why are we still so afraid of that? Why is that something that we're so ambivalent towards? So, moving on. Women in the military. This is interesting. I know there are a lot of veterans in the audience. But when you have people from the top deciding that we need more women in power, it happens. And now when we're talking about officers, except for the Marines, because that's how they roll, we have 20% female officers. And I was just in San Antonio for a conference, and I was checking into my hotel, and all of a sudden, all these women in uniform started to walk in. It was an officers training program. I'm like, where are the guys? They're like, oh no, we're taking over. I said, okay. So this is a trend. But when you actually look at women who are allowed to fight in combat around the world, this is the map that we get. So sometimes you can make a difference if you have a real top-down hierarchical decision-making structure, but most people don't think women should be fighting battles. And this is in a world where we have technological devices that can overcome our physical frailties, and yet we still don't have women in the military. I don't want to be in the military, but a lot of girls and women do. And then finally, if we're going IEMP, right, ideological, economic, military, and political, then we have to get to the ideological. And what do you guys think the Judeo-Christian Islamic Mormon tradition allows for women in leadership positions? Not so good. And you can say, well, Protestants, and the Anglican Church has, yeah, okay. But are they in high positions of power? No, they're not. I grew up Roman Catholic, right? So, and then you say, okay, what about Hindus? No. What about Buddhists? No. Women, I can't even find a slide that talks about women in power and religion today because they don't have any. They really don't have any. And religion being such an important part of our cultural framework, doing what, it forms so much of our interaction with the world around us. For women to have no power here is an extraordinary problem, I think. And I think some of you might think so too. So, I will not be discussing Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great, not because I don't think they're amazing, but because I don't think that it fits into my discussion of ancient women. We can talk about in the Q&A after, but I'll leave it at that. And now, what I want to do, after having set up that women still have no power, let's go back to the ancient world and do a parade of ladies who were able to achieve high pinnacles of power and look at the patterns and try to figure out how they did that. And I'll go through this reasonably quickly. A lot of them come from Egypt, which is interesting, and we can discuss why that might be. But I'm going to go in chronological order because Egypt is the oldest. We're going to hit the Egyptian ladies first. So Merneith is 5,000 years. She lived 5,000 years ago. It's pretty extraordinary to have this amount of information from the past. And she ruled, it seems, and this is a long time ago, so we have very limited evidence, but it seems she ruled on behalf of her young son, a king named Dan. And she was so powerful ruling on behalf of this child, even when he eventually grew up, it doesn't seem like she fully relinquished her power. But she never took on a formal title. It was always an informal title. It never marked as such. But when they buried her with, what's the number, 40? They buried her surrounded by 40 sacrificial victims. The kings of the first dynasty in Egypt had courtiers and possibly maybe even the sons of the previous king sacrificed, maybe in public, maybe in private, but sacrificed to accompany the king in the afterlife. And I can't think of any way of demonstrating power than that. To show people, I can take these lives, I can take these people with me. I am so important that I'm going to take 100, 200, 300 people with me, and you will watch them die, and you will watch them be buried. That's a demonstration of power, pure and simple. And Merneith was a part of that. She was so important that she was given 40 sacrificial victims of her own. Sobek Nofru, an incredibly important female, the first in Egypt to take on the title of king, as far as we know. And the reason I say king and not queen is because in the ancient Egyptian language, the word queen just meant woman of the king. It was something connected to the king. So when a woman stepped up in ancient Egypt, she called herself king. And Sobek Nofru is no different here. And this is the way she did it. She's ruling at the end of a dynasty. So her father dies, and then her brother dies, and she's the only one that's left. There's no one else there. Some guy ends up marrying her, and he dies. And then she rules for about 4 years on her own, and she calls herself king. She puts the Nemi's headdress on, and she puts it on over her dress. And over her dress, as a queen, she ties on the kilt of a king. So she keeps her feminine self, and then she lays over it all of the elements of the masculine kingship. And she cake and eat it too. But at the end of her reign, when she ostensibly dies a natural death, a new dynasty takes over. And she has no genetic follow-up. And think of how kingship is supposed to work. The king is dead, long live the king, and then son, and then grandson. It is supposed to be, especially in Egypt, a divine transition from father to son. And whenever a woman rules, you have no transition to the next. She has no offspring that she can hand it off to, and that's very interesting to me. Hatshepsut, we'll come back to her, but I want to do this in chronological order. So she comes into power because the next king, after her half-brother and husband dies, is a baby. And he was probably a 1-year-old, maybe a 1.5-year-old, and they stick him on the throne, and they put a crown on his head, and he goes, what's that? And then they give him the crook and the flail, and he's like, I mean, because that's what a 1-year-old's gonna do, right? And the courtier is all looking at the situation, going, oh my God, how are we gonna deal with this? There's a baby on the throne, and if you read my book, I have this whole section about all of the diseases and infestations and parasites that affected the ancient Egyptians, and how making it past the age of 1 was a victory. Making it past the age of 5, and they would breastfeed until 4, and be weaned, you get all of that immunological benefit. If you can make it past weaning, then, and you live, that's an achievement. You'll be riddled with worms. You'll have some bloodworms and some tapeworms and some hookworms, and you probably have already had malaria once, and that's going to keep recurring. And you might have survived the smallpox epidemic, but you're alive, so that's okay. These people are looking at a baby, chewing on his crook and flail, and thinking, my God, he's going to die. They all die. They've had their own children die. They've watched probably half of their own children die before them. Could do nothing about it. That's what living in the ancient world is and was. I like to think of it in the present tense. And Hatshepsut steps in and says, it's okay, everybody, I got this. I can do this. It's okay. She was trained for power from birth. She's the daughter of a king, a sister of a king. And she's able to slide into that position as regent in informal power. And then we'll look at what happens to her after. So let's continue our parade. Nefertiti, this sounds familiar to you guys, right? Wife of Akhenaten, that king who started monotheism, if you want to call it that, in ancient Egypt. At the end of his reign, so he dies, and he started this weird experiment with this new religion that most Egyptians are not so keen on, because he's told them that their other gods don't exist, or that they can't worship their other gods, or he's just funneled money away from their temples. And so when Akhenaten dies, Nefertiti steps in and tries to hold on to the fragments of that ideological power system. And she's there for a very short time, maybe a year, maybe less. And interestingly, if she is Tutankhamun's mother, and that's debated, but if she is, then maybe this woman did have a genetic legacy. But it's strange, if she was Tutankhamun's mother, why not just give the kingship right to Tutankhamun? It's a different story, different lecture for another day, but it adds to our pattern building, trying to figure out how women got power in the ancient world, what allowed them to get to the top. Tawosret, or Tawasret, 19th dynasty queen, whose husband died. He was actually taken out of power and then maybe put back into power. But it's the end of the dynasty. She doesn't have offspring, it seems. There's no son. And she ends up ruling as king, and rules for a couple of years, and then a new dynasty starts after her. Again, she has no genetic legacy. It moves on to a different family after her death. But she's, like so many other women, trying to hold on to the fragments of a dynasty that's falling apart, that's become defunct. And now let's leave Egypt behind for a little bit and talk about Jezebel and Athaliah. So you may not know the story. Go back to your biblical text when you get home tonight. Pull out your Bible and read it. It's an amazing story. But when we hear the word Jezebel, the name Jezebel, good things do not pop into our minds, right? So she's this disloyal woman for worshiping more than one god. And she's considered this painted woman for putting on makeup and trying to make herself glamorous and beautiful. And these are the things we remember about Jezebel. But let me put her in context. In the ancient Near East, at this time, when we're talking about 9th century BCE, everyone worshipped more than one god except these crazy people who worshipped only Yahweh. And amongst those crazy people who only worshipped only Yahweh, the priests were pushing hard for that reality, fighting hard to get people to accept a new and radical monotheist ideology. It was a strange and bizarre thing. Jezebel was normal. Jezebel was doing what every other queen in the ancient Near East was doing at the time. And to put on makeup and finery and to make herself look good was what every other rich person in the ancient Near East did to separate themselves from somebody else. But it worked really well for the priests of Yahweh at this time to then put Jezebel into a specific category, to call her disloyal, to call her a whore, sorry to the children know, and to then shove her out a window and have her eaten by dogs. I mean, that's how she ends up, right? And her daughter, Athaliah, ends up ruling in her own right and reaching the highest pinnacles of power on behalf of her son. And we don't remember her not as much as Jezebel. Her story is a little more sexy for us. And she's executed as soon as her grandson comes to the throne. So she also meets a very bad end. And my point with these women is that we like to tell stories about women doing things very badly once they reach the highest pinnacles of power. These are the stories we like to replicate. These are the names that you remember. You know the name Cleopatra, you know the name Jezebel, and we'll see if there's any other names that might strike you as familiar. You don't know the name Hatshepsut. Most people can't pronounce it. We don't remember the successful women, something that we push aside. I'll discuss that in a bit. There's some textual evidence for this woman named Samu or Shamu Ramat, a Syrian queen, also 9th century, around the same time as Jezebel, definitely a polytheist. And she ruled on behalf of her son for 4 years. And that's all we have from the ancient Assyrian texts. And so you think, okay, the rule returned to her son, no big deal. But then you see the stories that are told about her as time goes on. And they're aggrandized, they're romanticized, and they're made bigger. And she becomes Semiramis. She becomes this woman who is so sexually greedy that she has a man every night and then she has him killed immediately after. She's a man eater. And so this idea of her having this power, they associate it with this sexual hunger that cannot be controlled. It's a typical story. She's considered so greedy and so power hungry that is the story that is continually told about her. Something must have happened during this 4-year reign when she was ruling on behalf of her son, but we don't know the exact details. But the stories of her greed and self-interest are aggrandized. Empress Le, maybe somebody you know, maybe not. If you're of Chinese descent, this is definitely somebody that you'll have heard of before. And at UCLA, I have a lot of students of Chinese descent, and they know who Empress Le is. And this woman was, formidable. She had her husband's concubines disfigured. She had some of her son's concubines disfigured. She had the sons of the concubines of her son killed if it wasn't the son that she wanted, according to the historians. And so she went after power in a very brutal way. And these are the stories that are continually replicated about Empress Le and told again and again. And the Chinese historians are not shy about saying she ruled at the end of a dynasty. After her, it was a different dynasty. And the reason that women come to, or let me put it this way. The Chinese historians say that crisis comes because women are in power. What I'm going to tell you today is that women are allowed into power only when there's a crisis. Does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, good. Okay, Cleopatra. So if we go outside, or if I just ask you guys, have you heard about Cleopatra? Yeah, I've heard about Cleopatra. Jezebel, no, I don't know the details, but yes, I've heard about Jezebel. Hatshepsut? Was that last one? But Cleopatra. Glamour, ego, melting priceless pearl earrings in a glass of vinegar, having slaves murdered with different poisons so she can try her poison out, decide which one she likes the best. She does not leave Egypt better than she found it. She ends up pretty much giving Egypt as a province to the Roman Empire, and after her reign, there is no more autonomous reign in ancient Egypt. It just becomes a part of the Roman Empire. Her methodology is quite crude. Her methodology is to seduce two of the most successful Roman warlords the world has ever seen and have offspring with those Roman warlords, trying to create a dynasty in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's her methodology. And this is what we love to tell stories about. The seductress, the temptress, the woman that can look Mark Antony in the eye and he's just powerless. He can't do anything against this sexual power in front of him. And in the end, she gets what she deserves, so we think, and we have Shakespeare writing plays about her. And these are the stories that we like to tell about women and power. I'm going to skip Boudica. Too complicated. You can look her up. She's awesome. Okay, so you see the pattern, right? When do women gain power? Crisis, crisis, crisis. We could have war. We could have the end of a dynasty, and there's no living sons for whatever reason. In Egypt, it's probably because of inbreeding, which is interesting. The heir of the crown, the king sitting on the throne is way too young. A 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 12-year-old, you need somebody to help that child out. And if you have a child on the throne, a male child, are you going to invite a man to come in and help that child rule, or are you going to have his mother come in, or his aunt? I would go with the mother or the aunt, because there's less possibility of her taking over that kingship and killing the child and just moving him to the side and taking that power over completely. Whereas if you invite a male into that regency position, the possibilities for coup are endless, so you should be careful with that. In Hatshepsut's case, and I forgot to say that, and this is very important, right? So Hatshepsut ends up taking the kingship while there's another king on the throne. And she never rules alone, never. There is not one woman in the ancient world that I can find, Empress Le included, who rules alone. Both Hatshepsut and Empress Le have either young males next to them or incapacitated males. Empress Le's son is supposedly a coward who was kind of addled in the brain, and she's like, yeah, I want that. I can rule with that. And so either somebody was too young or somebody was incapacitated, but note, no woman is ever able to rule for longer than 4 years alone. She's going to rule for a significant period of time and make a considerable impact on her state. There's got to be somebody with male equipment occupying the throne next to her. And then, of course, we have Cleopatra's methodology at the end, or Semiramis, arguably, involving yourself sexually with a powerful man. It's a good way to gain power. But there's crisis there, too. So, really, they're excluded from power, ideologically, economically, militarily, politically. And so it was in the ancient world, arguably, to the large extent, so it is today. And why is it that they're only able to step in during a crisis? And why is it that female success is largely ignored? And that female failure, female leadership failure is something that we celebrate and talk about and replicate and write about and aggrandize. We love talking about that. Those are stories that we really, really dig. No archaeological pun intended. And now let's dig into Hatshepsut a little bit more. So Hatshepsut started out as a priestess, a very, very important priestess, God's wife of Amun, it's called. And I won't go into the details of this because there are children in the audience, so we'll keep it family friendly. But you can imagine. Maybe you can't, I don't know. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So she took this priestess position when she was very young, as the king's daughter, likely, and she was probably only 10, 11, 12 when she started this position as priestess. And she probably started training for this quite young, maybe as early as 6. So essentially this woman has the incense of the temple, the cool stone walls, the chanting that she hears around her, it's just bred into her bones. She understands temple spaces. She understands how ideological power works. And we'll see that this ends up being a very useful thing for her. But this priestess position also comes with lands and a title, economic power in its own right. And she's going to use this to catapult herself further into power. I'm going to skip. Don't worry about the text. Don't worry about the text. But essentially, what she does next is when her husband and half-brother dies, and he dies after only 3 years, and he may have been inbred himself, it's not quite clear. But he dies maybe from smallpox. It seems he had an enlarged heart. He was never very healthy. He dies after only 3 years of marriage with Hatshepsut, leaving only babies, toddlers, to occupy the throne next. And they choose one of these toddlers, and he's crowned. And then all of the courtiers look to Hatshepsut. And I'll read part of this. So let's see. Tutmosis II went up to heaven, and he united with the gods. So that's her half-brother, husband. His son, and that would be Tutmosis III, was raised in his place as king of the 2 lands. He ruled upon the throne of the one who begat him. His sister, the god's wife of Amun, Hatshepsut, fulfilled the needs of the 2 lands, or the needs of the land, the 2 lands following her counsels. She was served, Egypt was obedient, the divine granaries were and overflowing. So we see she has political power, she has economic power, she has ideological power. Things are going really, really well. And then you skip down, and it says, a mistress of decrees and words, effective were her counsels. Everyone's doing what she says. No one has a problem with this. There's no pushback against her rule. The 2 banks were content with her speech. Her majesty praised me, and she loved me. She knew my excellence in the palace. She provided me with things, and she made me great. And this last bit is important, because one of Hatshepsut's main avenues to power, besides ruling on behalf of this young child, was to look at the courtiers around her and look at all of the landowners and the rich people that were running ancient Egypt, and to say, you give me this power, I'm going to give back to you. And he says it flat out. She gave me things. She made me great. And if you look at the courtiers who ruled at the time of Hatshepsut, their tombs, their statues, their stuff is bigger and more impressive, and it shows more wealth than anything we had seen before. So Hatshepsut had to give to get. She had to pay off, essentially, so that people would let her have this power. Trust me, politics today is no different. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. She then starts to claim the kingship indirectly. She can't claim it directly. She can't call herself king yet, for whatever reason. We're probably talking about 4 years into this experiment as regent, maybe 5. And we have on this text here that she's called the one to whom Ra, and that's the sun god, has actually given the kingship. So they don't call her king, and they don't show her as a king. They show her as a female queen. But they say the sun god's given her the kingship. She's doing it. One of the ways that Hatshepsut got the job as king eventually and had herself crowned formally as king, because she will do it in a couple of years, is by doing the job first. So she showed her ability to do the job so that she could get the job. It's not a case of ambition, it's a case of skill in her case. Why she takes on the kingship formally is still not clear. But she does, and here we see her as a woman wearing the crown of a king, named king, and talking and working with the god, offering him jars of wine directly in front of the god Amun-Re. No intercession in between. To show a woman directly in front like that is an unusual thing. So she actually does make this leap. And she never says why, except to say, the god Amun-Re asked me to do this. Amun, my father, my god, asked me to do this. I'm only doing what he said. She's using ideological power to claim her ambitions. She's not saying because I deserve it, because I'm doing the job, because you want me. No, she lays it all at the feet of the god. And here she is being crowned. Notice she looks like a man in this depiction. We'll talk more about that in a bit. She's always ruling with another. And when she depicts herself, she shows herself first, but she shows herself almost as a twin to him. And she can never be free of him. If she ever did want to have him assassinated, murdered, whatever, and rule in her own right, she was probably too canny and too clever and strategic to try it, because she would have just been removed from power. This double kingship was her avenue to power. That's her way of getting it. And Hatshepsut, the most powerful woman in the ancient world I've ever seen and I've ever found, and I've been looking, she never ruled alone. She always ruled with this other king. And yeah, he was a child for most of her reign, but he grew up eventually. She was a jobs creator. She professionalized things that before had been only informal, creating real salaries and real benefits that hadn't been there before. Got to give to get. She controlled the money, made sure that the money flowed to her and that she could then dispense it as she saw fit. She relied on men with no connection to the patriarchal family, with no connection to the patrician families, the old patrician families that had Thebes and Memphis and Heliopolis in a stranglehold of their own power. She put new men into positions that had no loyalties to other families, only loyalties to her. It was a very strategic move. She controlled the priesthood. The priesthood loved her. The priesthood thought she was one of theirs. She's a priestess. She's been working with them since childhood. They trusted her to funnel money and resources to them. They supported her power arguably first and more than anybody else. And to claim her power, she used religious pageantry. She had the oracle of the god Amun veiled here in his shrine on that bark, that boat that the priests are carrying on their shoulders. She had the god Amun appear in the temple space, and she was asked directly by the god Amun to serve. Whether she did it in a cynical, planned out, working with her priest kind of way. Okay, look, we'll have the bark of Amun come out. I'm gonna stand. You guys do this, and then this guy's gonna go, ooh, and then I'm gonna go, yes, I will do what you say. I mean, it could have been that strategically done. Usually, however, the ideologies that work the best are the ones that people believe in the most. So I suspect she fervently believed that somehow, some way, and the priest did as well, that Amun-Re was asking her to serve. And so they come out with the bark, and the bark finds her, and the bark just zeroes in on her, and she says, what do you want? This is what she tells us in her text. What do you want of me? And he says, I need you to serve me. I need you to lead the people. And she's like, whatever you say, I'll do what you say. And this is publicly done. Brilliant. What a strategy to use religion and that religious display of deep piety to show that the god needs her and only her. And she's going to use that line for the rest of her reign. She claims that she's the offspring of the god himself, that his seed made her, that he impersonated or went into her and like sort of embedded himself in her father, the king, and that when he, and this is the act of sexual union, which is very sweet. The text is much more explicit, but the picture is very sweet. And this is Hatshepsut's conception. They're touching hands, right? That's how that works. But she claims outright that the god is her father. And I mean outright physically, and the text is very, very descriptive in all of those physical aspects. She was a warrior king. She went off to Nubia and exploited the people there within an inch of their lives. Nubia means land of gold. And one of the ways that she was able to fund this regime, this odd female kingship, was through control of the gold. And if she's got Nubia in her grasp, she's bringing back all of these resources that will then legitimize her reign, pay off her courtiers, make everybody richer, create more jobs. She left Egypt more prosperous than it had ever been. She left the empire larger than it had ever been. Incredible success. She knew how to make a splash with expeditions. So if you think of Napoleon and his journeys to Egypt and all of the intellectuals that he brought with him to draw the different birds and all the monuments and bring back all of these, if you've ever been to the Louvre in Paris, the amount of Egyptian objects is astounding. First time I was in the Louvre, I cried because it was just, I couldn't handle it. But Napoleon knew to make a splash, a political splash, by saying, look at all this exotica, and have people talk about it in the salon and at the university. That was a way that he maintained and created more power for himself amongst his elites. Hatshepsut did the same. She sent an expedition off to this land of Punt, this mythical land of Punt, probably around modern-day Eritrea. And they had to drag all of these boats through the deserts on the way to the Red Sea, put the boats back together at the Red Sea, head down to Eritrea, where they got all kinds of incense trees, gum arabic, frankincense, myrrh, all of this, and brought it back to Egypt. And she gave it out to courtiers, she gave it to her priests. This was a way of making a splash and then paying off her people simultaneously. And wow, was she an innovative builder. If anybody here has been to Egypt or wants to go, this will be a highlight. This is her temple of millions of years. This is her funerary temple. It's one of the most astoundingly innovative structures you'll ever see, built into this cliffside that catches the sun at just the right light when it's setting in the west. And she has these ramps, and it's like a giant stage. And she would have displayed to her people that Amun chose her as king in this setting. She understands pageantry, and she understands connect that pageantry to religion. Oh, I'm going to skip this one. Yeah, it's too much to explain. Those of you who know about Punt, sorry.
Take my class.
What?
Take my class.
Oh, okay, you talk about Punt? Okay, great. Who doesn't want to talk about Punt? Awesome. And she knew how to reinvent herself. She's like the Madonna of the ancient world. So she starts out her reign. I know you guys are a lot of you too young for that, but she's still around. She starts out her reign showing herself as a female king. So she's wearing a dress, and then she puts on the nemes, like Sobek Nofru did before her. She doesn't tie on the male kilt, but it's close. So she takes her femininity and then she cloaks it with that masculine kingship, that veneer. But it's problematic. Tutmosis III, her co-king, is growing up. He's becoming 12, 13, 14 years old. Can a woman tell a growing boy, and for all that we can tell, a very virulent, strong boy, what to do? She always depicts herself first. Can she do this and show herself as a woman? It seems she knew she couldn't. Hatshepsut knew that she had to fit herself to the system. She couldn't demand the system to fit herself, or to fit her strange and aberrant female kingship. So she messed with it. She played with it. And this image, this statue, is the most shocking of all. If you ever get to New York and you see this piece, you're like, wait, she's topless. But wait, she has breasts. Ooh, that's weird. But she's a woman. She's got these narrow shoulders. What's going on? And her face is so feminine. So she's trying to show herself as this weird hybrid male-female thing. And this statue was probably shocking for the people who saw it. They just went, not sure about that. So quickly, she went to this, where she's just as masculine as the king before her and the king after her. She just decides to change the way she looks, and you have to wonder. When she went out in rituals, did she bind her breasts? Did she wear the royal beard and have it tied around the back of her head, underneath the nemes? Did she wear the masculine kilt and everyone could see her knees? Was it a little weird? Were they embarrassed about it? We don't know those details. But at least in her stature and in her reliefs, she had to become a cross-dressing masculine king. And think about it, when she did this, it's when her co-king was turning 16, 17. She needs to change to fit him. She needs to change to maintain her power vis-a-vis his growing influence and his growing maturity and power. And then we come to the end of all of this. The price of her ambition, the reason we don't remember her. She ends up being erased from all of her reliefs and her statues. If I go back, can you see how this is pieced together? Can you see how it doesn't look quite right? That there's cracks throughout? Maybe this one's a little bit easier to see. Archaeologists and conservators have pieced these together. They were brutally smashed with sledgehammers and thrown into a pit in the ground in front of her temple of millions of years. And her reliefs, they erased her names and her images and replaced them with her father's name, her brother's name, and in some cases her nephew's name, Tutmosis III. And they've never removed her temple because her temple was built in one of the most sacred places in Egypt. They couldn't remove the entire temple, but they appropriated it. And here's the point I want to make. What Hatshepsut did, she did so well and so perfectly that it was easy for the kings to just take credit for it and to ignore that success and take it themselves. So if she left Egypt better than she found it, they can say, oh yeah, I left Egypt better than I found it. These things on these temple reliefs, all of this stuff that I'm showing you, this point thing and this thing, I did that. Or my father did that. Or my grandfather did that. And they can claim it And now we come to the reasons for why she had to be erased. And this is difficult and confusing. So there's the complex political reality, and let me talk about that first. The next king was a child, and a child of an unimportant mother. His name was Amenhotep II. And it is possible that Thutmose III, this is the co-king, Hatshepsut's co-king, decided that at the end of his reign, he needed to remove Hatshepsut. Because this is the interesting point. They didn't erase her names and images until 25 years after her death. So this wasn't like Hatshepsut's dead, oh my God, I hated my aunt so much, let's go smash all her stuff. This was somebody who was, Thutmose III, who was willing to be haunted by his co-king's presence, who left her statues, who left her temples intact for most of his reign, while he was off going on campaign and becoming the most formidable imperial king Egypt had ever seen. He left all of this stuff there until the very end of his reign, when he's thinking about who's going to succeed me, who's going to be my chosen son, my chosen crown prince. And when he chooses that crown prince, then he goes on this campaign of destruction, takes the sledgehammers to the statues, takes the chisel to the stone, sends people out everywhere to destroy her image where they can. And she's built so much they can't get to it all, which is wonderful. So there's that very complicated political reality that he's trying to somehow pave the way for a son that's coming from a mother's side that's not that important. And Hatshepsut complicates it. Having that female kingship in there ruins father to son to grandson. He wants that strict patriarchal succession. That's what we should see from ancient Egypt. That's divine kingship. And then there's the simple reason that a female's rule is a stopgap. And ancient Egypt allowed more female rulers than any other place in the ancient world. And you could argue that it's geography that allows this. It's protected on all four sides. It's a place that's not overrun by invaders very often. It's a place that doesn't see a lot of coups and assassinations. Egyptologists know of only 2 assassinations of kings before we get to the Ptolemaic period. After that, that's all. They're all killing each other. So it's a place that values continuity. It's a place that values stasis in the status quo. The Egyptians, when they see a crisis, are willing to accept a female more than having some warlord come in and ruin everything. They want to see that continuity. And so Hatshepsut is able to step into that as well. But in the end, that female kingship was too aberrant, too strange, something that needed to be removed. And they removed her so well that we can't say her name anymore. So everyone work with it. We'll end with this. Hatshepsut, can you remember it? Hatshepsut, we all got it? Okay, so she's our resource. We can remember her, use her as our cautionary tale. And thank you very much. Questions? And you guys cut me off on this time, otherwise I'll just keep doing this forever. Yes?
I was confused. She ruled.
I know it's hard.
She ruled for her son, but then her nephew took over.
No, it's not her son. And as I was speaking, I realized that I didn't say that, and this is an important point. So thank you. It's a very important point. So Thutmose II, her half brother and husband, dies, and he leaves all of these toddlers, and none of them are hers. She doesn't produce a son. So she's king's daughter, king's sister, she's never king's mother, which is kind of the twist of fate that creates all the dominoes falling, right? So it's another woman's child that she's regent to, and that's her nephew. And I didn't mention that. And as I was going on, I'm like, oh, well, we'll get to it, but yes. So she's that powerful, or the mother of Thutmose III was that uneducated and incapable, but she's able to step in for a child that's not her own, and then take the kingship despite that, alongside him. If she had been his mother, it's unlikely she would have taken the step of kingship, formalizing her power. She probably wouldn't have been able to. She would have stepped back. It's not clear why she felt the political need to do it in the first place. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And sorry for that omission. Yes.
I've seen the sculpture of Sinnamut. Was
Yeah.
her daughter Neferrer?
Yeah.
And do you believe that Sinnamut was only the vizier, or do you think he was her lover?
Yeah, okay. So Senenmut, if I go back, and I didn't entertain the possibility, but we do need to talk about it. Let's find it here. Okay, so this guy was her most favored courtier. He had access that no other man had. He had control of her treasury. He had control of the Amun-Re temple treasury. He was a really important guy. And when Hatshepsut's, actually a little bit before Hatshepsut's images were erased, all of his stuff was destroyed and smashed as well. So he had enemies. Now, there is no overt reference to any kind of affair of any kind. But Egyptologists have looked at this close relationship and said, oh my God, he must have been her lover. Or, oh my God, he must have told her what to do and helped her engineer this climb in power. And I push back against this for a number of reasons. There's no evidence for it, but Egyptians didn't talk about things like the ancient Romans or the ancient Greeks did. So if you're in a very competitive political context and you want to take down Mark Antony, you're going to talk about all his lovers, and you're going to say he sleeps with this or that, and you're going to talk about his character, and you're going to try to shame him in public. And that's what we do today too in our political system, right? That we're very competitive, and we use character assassination to gain power. The ancient Egyptians didn't do this. And they didn't talk about lovers, they didn't talk about the king's lovers. If they did, they whispered it, and they did not write it down. There's no letters talking about, oh, the king had this going on and that going on. There's no gossip really discussed. So, there's no context for her to have written this down. But there are other kings, not just Hatshepsut, male kings, who had courtiers as close, if not closer, with more power perhaps even than this guy had. And they're male, and so nobody says they had a gay relationship. Why don't they say that? They should. There's just as much evidence for those close courtiers and those kings having sexual congress as there is for Hatshepsut and Senenmut. So my conclusion is, they could have had an affair. It's completely possible. But Hatshepsut, at this stage in her life, was the most important and powerful person in the entire ancient world. Bar none. She's got a little kid on the throne next to her. She can do whatever she wants. She can sleep with whomever she wants. She can have as many lovers as she wants. There's just no context to write that down. The idea that Senenmut is her only opportunity is kind of laughable to me. So that's how I look at this. And I find it astounding that Egyptologists still spread this story, that he was the one pulling the strings, and she had more opportunities than this old guy who was like 25 years old in there. Come on. This is what I like to pop that bubble as soon as I can. Yes, Paul?
Do you think the mummy from KV-60 is Hatshepsut?
I don't. And I only talk about that in my footnotes in the book, because I think it takes away from the story, and I want it to be as narrative-driven, Hatshepsut, strategically driven as possible. The problem with that mummy, and the best citation is this German article that I do cite here, and I can share it with you. The problem with the mummy is that the brain isn't removed. It's poorly mummified. It's too old. It's too fat. Well, the fat part I can't really know, right? She could have been extremely fat, I don't know. But it's too old. And there are other candidates that I think would fit better. And the evidence that Zahi Hawass produced in his Discovery Channel driven research is not published for anybody to check. There's no documentation for any forensic archaeologist to really look at. And so even though they say they found a match between a tooth and between that, and in a box that says Hatshepsut and this body, I don't think there's enough to go on. And all the evidence suggests, evidence around her tomb that archaeologists have found, all the evidence suggests that she was buried as a king. With all that demanded, with all of the value and money, think of Tutankhamun's stuff. He was a nothing king. This was a king. So she was buried in state with valuable objects. Her mummy would have had the brain removed. It would have been in better quality, and just given what we know about her life, it's too old. So I think there's too much speaking against it, and there are other possible candidates. But yeah, we'll have to see if it's hard to get access to those bodies, right? To do that kind of DNA research, it's tricky. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I was wondering, was there the radical shift that you showed, that final sculpture of her, as you said, as completely masculinized? Masculinized?
Yeah.
How do they know that is supposed to be her? Does it say?
It does. And the cool thing, and I didn't go into the details of this, is that while she depicts herself as masculine, and actually I can go back to one of the reliefs that I think actually points to this better. So here she's, let me put on my, bear with me. There we go. Okay, so she's masculine, right? Nice wide shoulders, I don't see any breasts, everything looks fine. And then you look at the text, and here's her name, Mat-Ka-Ra. So that's her throne name for Hatshepsut, clearly identified, and she calls herself the daughter of Re. So she has two audiences going simultaneously. She's not lying to us. She's just representing a different reality. Here I am male, as you see before you. But everyone knows I'm female. The God knows I'm female. I am not the son of Re. I am the daughter of Re. And that little T, that little thing right there, that's what makes it into a daughter. Sa is son, Sat is the daughter. So she's representing herself in text for the intellectuals who can read, which is what, 5% or less of the Egyptian population? Those people she'll say, yeah, you know I'm a female, you hang out with me, this is fine. But for the populace as a whole, or for the divinity of the ritual, she shows herself as masculine. So she's having her cake and eating it too. You could argue. But this entire text is an utterance by Amen-Re, and that so he's speaking, and then he says, my daughter, Mat-Ka-Ra, may you establish the thrones upon your head. So it's great. Yeah. Yes.
Have you been to her temple?
I have many times, and it's one of my favorite places in Egypt.
And
Yeah.
wasn't there a big pit next to the temple where most of her broken up statues were?
Yeah, and archaeologists ignominiously named it the Hatshepsut hole, which I find horrible. Yeah, but there is a big pit there, and they found, and you know, these statues are incomplete. There must be more statuary fragments someplace else. It's a huge area, and if you look at the actual temple itself, let me see if here. It's a massive structure, and she builds these big stages, which are giant. It's almost as difficult as building a pyramid. You have to build that platform and then go back and build another platform. So these are massive, massive structures, very, very expensive. Yeah, some of the coolest places I've ever been in. And this is only, let me do this. So these parts here are only porticos. They don't go all the way into the building. This is a solid structure. And the same over here. You can only go into that portico, and that's a solid structure. You have these ramps, and then you have a big stage, and then a ramp, and then a big stage. And then this part up here is a more secret and exclusive part of the
So
temple.
did they live there?
No, it's meant for ritual activity. There's no palace in association with it. And this is her temple of millions of years, which means it's her palace associated with her afterlife, and feeding her in the afterlife, and associating her with the gods in the afterlife. So it belongs in the land of the dead, the land of the setting sun, in the desert. And her home, her palace, would have been further out east in the inundation lands, where it's cool, where you have trees, where you have birds. It would have been a very different setting, and her palace would have been made of mud brick, not of stone. And that's why we don't have it. We have one possible palace at Malkata in Thebes, and otherwise we don't have any palaces. But they would have been grand and amazing places.
Did recently a French team found two statues beneath an obelisk?
Yeah.
Claiming
Yeah.
that one may be her.
No, the statues they found underneath that obelisk are actually 13th dynasty, so they're a good 400 years older than Hatshepsut, but it's her obelisk, and so they use that statuary to, you may ask, how do they know when they started erasing her names? And one of the ways that you can figure that out is by using the architecture of a very complicated place, where king after king is building upon what the other kings did. So you have to look at the historical records and say, oh, I built this in year 25 and I built this in year 30. And then you have to look at the architecture and say, well, this wall was built around this obelisk by this king, and then they built something else, and this is on top of these statues. And the statues actually don't matter for the dating of Hatshepsut's erasure, but all the stuff around those obelisks, they matter a great deal.
That was incidental. That was incidental. Did they put the obelisk over the statue?
I don't know if that was incidental. The Egyptians don't do things like that by mistake. It's almost like it's a sacred deposit, a way of making that space sacred. To put your obelisk, which is meant to be a ray of light in stone, and that's capped with electrum of gold, to put that on top of a statue of a king is a way of charging it. And an ancient and sacred king, I mean, it's a way of marking sacred space, even though it can't be seen. When you're depositing it in that ritual of deposit, it's a very powerful thing. I doubt it was. I think it was on purpose. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When she put on the pharaoh's attire and she did the Hatshepsut festival, the Jubilee, where
Yes.
she ran,
Yes.
do you believe that Moses III participated with her?
I think that Jubilee, and I talk about this in the book, she celebrated Jubilee in year 16. And you're not supposed to celebrate a Jubilee in year 16. You're supposed to celebrate a Jubilee in year 30. She kind of breaks the rules. But if you count up the reign of her father, the reign of her half-brother, and then it was the third sole reign before her, and then her reign, it adds up to 30 years. So she's kind of celebrating a Jubilee for the Thutmose family, for her dynasty, for her father's dynasty. And she's doing it in year 16 when Thutmose III has probably come of age. So and then after that Jubilee, he's there next to her as a twin in every depiction. It's almost like marking his appearance and glory as king of Egypt alongside her, not as a minor king, but as one fully operational and able to act on his own. And after that, it seems he takes on the reins of power as chief general, which makes us remember, if he had wanted her dead, he could have done it at any time, but he didn't. This kid grew up watching his aunt, and I should have said that, but yes, watching his aunt as the most powerful person, male or female, that he'd ever encountered. For him, she was power, and he learned from her how to be powerful. And that's the kind of conjecture I go into in the book, trying to figure out, how did he feel about her? How did she feel about him? It's complicated. But to him, that was his greatest model of power. And man, it seemed to have worked, because he ended up going on campaign after campaign after her death and expanding Egypt's empire in Northwest Asia to an extent that no one had ever seen before. Pretty extraordinary. Maybe he had something to prove, maybe, but she taught him how to do it. And so if he didn't have her killed, she didn't have him killed. She ruled always alongside him, and she made sure that he was trained and able and educated, and he ended up leaving Egypt better than he found it. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship. Those two really created a very, very strong Egypt during their rule. There doesn't seem to be much animosity between the two until he has her images erased, and then it's complicated. But you'll do anything for your children, right? So maybe that's what it's about.
We're going to do one more.
Yeah, it's fine.
Did you still have your question? I saw you had your hand up earlier.
Sure. I know we have to view ancient people as humans like us, and yet you have to have a lens that we don't make them Eleanor Roosevelt or Queen Elizabeth or, our culture. How do you do that?
How do I do that?
It must be very difficult at times. Not to read
Well, of
current
course.
things into their things.
We all do it. Everybody does it. I mean, I think it's, you have your first anthropology class, you start grad school and you read theory and you have a text that says we're all applying our own preconceived notions to the ancient world, and you have to be aware of it, but you're still going to do it. All I can do is know what I know about Egypt and know what I know about that culture and religion as deeply as I can. But of course, there's still notions in there that are too modern. That might be inappropriate. I'm not going to say that they're not. So I'm constantly thinking about it. And the conjecture that I apply to this woman, it is pushing the boundaries. And I go into that in my forward quite openly. And that's where I'm going to catch flack from other Egyptologists, and deservedly so. But I think it's worth the experiment to try to figure out, if I know that she's in a certain circumstance, with certain people, in a certain place, within a certain power structure, that's when I'm going to engage in my conjecture. My conjecture isn't, I don't know, so much stuff written about the ancient world that's involved with conjectures, either ancient aliens or who murdered King Tut, or I'm gonna find the body. Let's just go to the body, right? I'm gonna find out which mummy is hers and go through this whole long exercise of proving that it's this mummy, not that mummy. Who cares? What does it really matter which mummy is hers? I don't really care that much, but I care about what she did and why she did it, and why we erased her, and why nobody remembers her name. So that's of interest to me, and it's a different kind of conjecture. It's a more narratively driven conjecture. If that makes sense.
Can't be trapped in your niche.
I'll go back to my niche soon, and then I'll come back out again. I go into my cave, and then I'll come out of my cave, and I like that. Both feed the other.
Thank you again, Tara, for coming. Remember that she's going to be over in the cafeteria right over there, signing books. They're available in the bookstore. So if you want to speak with her more, please meet us out there. We'll be getting her across the passageway here from the